By the way, I have the links to the other trainings to send you, so I'll get you those after we're done today.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started here. So everyone should be seeing my screen. I'm logged into your database here as myself, as you can see. So today we're going to basically provide a basic overview of the database, talk about some of the main tabs that you see at the top of your screen, as well as, of course, those that are on a person's record. Okay. We're starting off here actually on the My Vista tab. This is basically just the landing page. Every time you log into Outcome Tracker, you're going to start here. This page is currently configured just as you see here. The main thing to keep in mind is that reports and queries are sometimes linked to this My Vista page. The reason for that is that makes them available as soon as you log in. So if there were any linked here, for example, I'd be able to just click on the report or the query from here and be able to run it and get the results that I'm looking for, versus having to go to the Reports tab and locate the query or the report. You also see that, of course, there's a calendar here on the left-hand side, as well as an area for tasks and reminders. We'll be talking about more about those later on in the training, but any tasks and reminders created in the system are listed here on the My Vista page as well. So again, this is just the landing page for a user once they log in into the database. The main part of the system, really, where you'll spend the bulk of your time, I'm sure, is people and organizations. So we're going to go into that here, and this is where you'll find all the different records that are in your database. They are categorized into one or more different roles. So on the right-hand side of the display options area, you're going to see a list of those different roles. So what I can do is, when I'm searching for a name, or if I want to bring up a list of names, what I can do is just select the particular role that I'm looking for. So for example, if I want to find somebody who's a participant in adult education, or at least in that role, I can select that role here and click the search function to bring up a list of names in that role. So that turned up only one. We can choose another one here. So you get the idea. Based on the role or roles that I select here, I'm going to bring up a list of names that are in those roles. And you can also, of course, select more than one role here. Along with choosing the role, you can also search for names in the system. So if I'm looking for a client by the last name of Smith, I can just enter that last name here and bring up any records that might match whatever I entered here. Okay, so you can use these filter options here to search for individual records based on selected roles or not, and you'll be able to bring up the records that you're looking for here. Okay, this is also the area that you'll go to, incidentally, to add new people or new organizations to the database. So over on the right-hand side of the page, you'll notice links under tasks here to add a new person or to add a new organization. So if I click the Add New Person option, for example, this takes me to the Add Person wizard. Okay, so to add a new person, all I need to do is enter their name. Okay, and we'll go ahead and do that here. So we'll call this person test user. And then we also need to assign them one or more roles. Okay, and so the roles are what they're doing with our organization. The roles are important as well, because the role determines what's going to show up on their record in terms of the different fields or questions that we have in our database. Each role may have a unique set of questions that's associated with their record, because we want to be sure that when we're on that record, we're only seeing those things that are relevant to them. If they're a participant, for example, that's going to be completely different information that we collect or keep track of versus somebody in a staff role, of course. Okay, so roles are how we differentiate records as well as the data that can be entered on a particular record. So I'm going to go ahead and put them, our test user here, into at least one of these roles and click the Add button. When you add a record, that takes you directly to the record that you just added. And immediately, the first thing we'll notice here is that there are a number of what we call subtabs on the record. These subtabs are where I can enter in different information based on the type of data indicated. So we're going to be talking about these different tabs here and the type of information that you'll either see or be able to enter or edit based on the tab. The first one that we're looking at, of course, is the general intake tab, and that is exactly what it suggests. It is where we enter that general application or intake information, and that consists of just basic things like their name, phone numbers, address information, preferred contact method, which is a multi-select checklist where I can select more than one, okay? Gender, ethnicity, so some demographic information that we want to keep track of course, birth date as well, marital status and housing. These are drop downs that allow me to select one value, education level, child names and dates of birth, and then we get into some insurance information as well as interest in other programs. So again, this is the general intake tab. This is really where my initial inquiry or application information is going. Okay, so all I need to do is really go down this tab, enter the information, and then click the Save button to save that information to the record. Keep in mind that when you're entering information on these tabs, you can tab over to the next question. And what I mean by that is you can click the tab button on your computer to go to the next field. So notice that I've gone to city, now to state, now to zip, just with the tab button. So you can tab forward to the next field in your database, which can make entering the data here a little easier. Okay. Again, once you complete that, you would save your entries, and that data goes then on the record that you're on. A couple quick things to note here. On the right-hand side, you're going to notice two buttons. One is address history. That brings up a list of any changes to that record's address. Okay, so over time, you might have somebody that moves, of course. So you would come to this tab to update their address, so you have their most recent address information. This button here is going to show you a listing of all of those different address changes. So over time, you'll be able to see when certain address details changed, if they have. Okay, so that's the address history button here. Just shows you a listing of any changes to their address information. The print form button opens up the form to a PDF. So if you, after you've entered your information and you've saved it, you want a hard copy of all of this information you entered, you can use that print form function there or button to produce a PDF of the form that you just entered.
Would it look like this, or would it have our
It would look
our
exactly
logo or
like
something?
this.
So we should
Now,
add our...
Yeah, you can add images to, this is a data entry form, by the way. You can add logos or images to a form. So yeah, if you want something like that to appear on the printable version of this, it does need to be added to the form itself. But yes, you can do that.
Okay.
The next tab here is business. And unlike the first page, this is where I would go to add a business for this particular person. This accomplishes two things that are actually very important. Number one, it's going to create a separate record for that business. So test user, he's just started a business. So I would come here and click the Add Business button to go ahead and add his business name. Notice that this record, unlike my person record, is going to be added as an organization or a business. So there's no first or last name here. Rather, it's an organization, which is the full name. It's going to go to in a role. Every record in the system has to be assigned at least one role, so Outcome Tracker knows what should go on the record. In this case, the role will be that business role that you see selected there. So when I click the Add button, that's going to add the business, and here we have a business profile. Okay, so this is essentially the business's application or intake information, where we're entering obviously the business address, when it started, profit and gross sales information, any certifications, number of employees, capital needs, and so forth. Okay, so when I enter this information is going to go on that business record. The other important thing about this is it creates a linkage or a relationship between the business, test business, and the client, test user. Okay, that linkage is very important. That's something that we can query against or report on. So if we ever need to get a list of people with a business, we can do that.
Okay.
So if we take a quick jump over to the Relationships tab, you will see what I mean. Test user is an owner of test business. Now, we haven't done anything with the Relationships tab at this point, but that relationship was automatically created because I added the business via this business tab, and that is set up to automatically create that linkage between owner and business with whatever information I enter here. If the person happens to open up another business, I would still come to this tab and I would click that Add Business button again. So that's going to create a new business record, and on that business record, I would come here again and enter the information for that business. Okay? That too will create a linkage or relationship between that new business and test user. Okay, so general intake, that's where I'm entering the intake information for the client. Business tab here, that's where I'm entering information for any related businesses for the client. So we've got a question here, what if there are multiple owners for a business? Okay, and that's a good question. The way to handle that would be, notice that while we're on this tab, there is a direct link here or a link to the business. If you click that, you're going to be taken to the business record itself. Remember I said that when you fill out the information on that tab, you are creating another separate record in the system for that business. Okay? Here, what we can do is go to the Relationships tab then for the business and add a relationship to another business owner. Okay?
Okay.
So we would say the test business is owned by, and then it's just a matter of searching for the name of that other owner here. Okay? So assuming we find it, then once I click Add, Juan here would become another owner of this business. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. So yeah, the relationships are going to work both ways. If you're on the business record, you'll be able to relate the business to an owner. If you're on the client record, which would probably be most of the time, you would use that business record to relate the client to the respective business. Let's take a look at the coaching tab. The coaching tab is where we can enter new coaching for the client. Okay, so right now, of course, this is a brand new record, so there is no information displayed here in terms of the coaching that they've had prior. That's what these columns refer to here. But if I click the Add New button, that's going to open up, which is an enrollment in the coaching activity. Okay, so here I would just enter the type of coaching. The coach, of course, subject, number of hours. Let's just say, enter some random data here, in person, and so forth. Okay, so this is all the information, of course, that you're noting about the coaching. To save that information or enter it, you would just click the Save button. Notice that you also have a print to PDF option here. Again, if you needed a hard copy of these coaching details, you would see it there. There are a few other tabs I'll just quickly talk about here with the coaching enrollment. The Notes Documents tab allows you to enter in any notes regarding the coaching. So let's say there's something else that you wanted to at least mention as far as this particular coaching appointment. Okay, you could enter that note here. The tab indicates as well that you can also upload documents with the note. Okay, so let me just enter a quick note here. Okay, there's my note. Notice that there's an option under the Documents tab to upload a file. Okay, clicking that allows me to then upload a file or a document for the note. Okay, so if there's anything that you want to reference in terms of the document with the note, you can do that. And we have another question here about these fields. Aren't they for coaching, on coaching for staff and not participant? My understanding is that they would be for that the client or the participant would be undergoing the coaching. So the staff person would come here to enter those details of the coaching for the participant.
Okay.
So this isn't coaching that staff is undergoing. It's for the participant, but staff is entering this information. Lastly, here we've got the Tasks and Reminders tab. I touched on this at the outset regarding the My Vista tab. In Outcome Tracker, you can add tasks or reminders, and these are simply follow-up items in the database. So if I needed to follow up with test user, for example, on this coaching session to get more information or something of that nature, I can add a reminder to the system to follow up with them. So I'm just going to do that here quickly. So you would enter in a summary of the task or the follow-up item that it is, when you want to be reminded. Okay, so I'm going to just set the date for today. And then you have a couple options here in terms of how you want to be reminded. It can be an alert in the system. If you're going to be working in Outcome Tracker, then it might make sense to have it alert you while you're working in the database that you need to follow up with so-and-so at this particular time. It can also be an email that's sent to you directly. So if you're not going to be working in the database, then obviously that might be a better choice so that you're reminded to follow up. You can send it to yourself, of course, or you can send it to another staff person in the database. So if you need a colleague to follow up with them, or if this isn't is an item meant for them, then you can send it to them, and they're going to get the alert, the email, or the alert in the system. Okay? So I'm just going to click the add button there, and you see right away there's the alert in the system that we're talking about here. It shows up at the top of your screen in yellow here, and you have the option to snooze for a certain period of time or just dismiss it entirely. So that's what we're going to do. I'm also going to get an email, of course, because that option was selected as well, that I need to follow up with test user. Okay. Notice that now we have an enrollment in a coaching session. So on this tab, now I'm seeing the details of that coaching session from today, obviously, and the different details that I entered for a few of those fields. Okay. So as you add coaching to the record, not only will you be able to come to this tab to enroll them in new coaching, but you're going to be able to see a history of their progress, if you will, or other enrollments in prior coaching sessions. And then you can click on these sessions to see the details about that particular coaching session. Okay, so you can use that to reference prior coaching or to enter new coaching. The activity summary tab is very similar, except this is going to show you all of their activity enrollments or their activity with the agency. So you see that the coaching is listed here as well. It provides a few details about the activity, when it happened, and its type, and the number of hours. Okay, so this is where I would go to enroll them in other activities in the database. So if I click on enroll an activity, here's the list of all of the different activities that I have. So if I was enrolling them in something like leaders attendance, for example, okay, I would go to activity summary. I would click that enroll an activity button here, and then I would select that leaders attendance activity and then enter those details. Now, some of these activities are not going to be relevant to every record, okay? So this participant, for example, may not ever be enrolled in this particular activity. Just know that aside from coaching, if they were to be involved in another activity that you need to enter data for, you would use the activity summary tab and then just click again that enroll an activity button. That's going to allow you to choose the activity to enroll them in. Okay, so you're going to be presented with this list here, and then you'll be able to then enter those enrollment details. Okay. So once I enter the details here, I would just click Update and Close to save that enrollment in that activity and this information. There is a Cancel button here, and that lets me delete that enrollment before saving it. Okay. So we also have here an emergency medical tab. The other thing to keep in mind, I just mentioned that some of the activities may not be relevant to every participant. Some of these tabs may not also show up on every record. We talked about roles earlier and how the fields that show up on a record are dependent on the roles that they're in. So based on certain roles, you may not see some of these tabs. Why? Because they're not relevant to that particular person. So it just helps to not show them at all. Okay. This happens to be the emergency medical tab, of course, where it's just a matter of entering the emergency contact information and different medical needs. Allergies, yes or no, dietary restrictions, whether the treatment authorization was signed and uploaded, and then obviously the emergency contact information itself here. Okay, so for entering that emergency medical information, you would just refer to that specific tab, just as I have, to enter that information. That is not entered on any other tab. It has a specific tab just for that information. Okay, and it's the same process. I would just enter it here, and clicking the Save button saves that information entered to this particular record. The Documents tab, we touched on documents earlier regarding a note, a coaching note, but this tab is where I can go to enter documents to the record itself. Okay, so if I have something that I needed to upload for the record, I can refer to this Documents tab to do that. There are two ways to upload documents. The first is to click this Upload Documents button. That's going to allow you to choose the file from your computer to upload to the record. Or if you have the file handy already, you can click it, drag and drop it here to this area, and that's automatically going to upload that file to the Documents tab. And then once uploaded, you're going to see a lot of information about the document or the list of documents that are associated with that record. What it's called, how big it is, who uploaded it and when, and then of course a link here to actually download it yourself. So if you needed access to whatever documents are listed here, under that download column, you'll be able to click an icon and download the document. Okay? So the Documents tab, that's going to show you a listing of any documents that have been uploaded for that particular record, as well as allow you to upload them as well. Relationships tab, again, this is going to show you how one record, in this case test user, is related to any other records in the database. So you have a variety of relationships in your database, or different ways that one record may be related to another, sibling to a child, parent to child, owner, owned by, of course. Okay, so as you add records to the system, depending on how you add those, you're going to see on the Relationships tab those linkages created. Just as we saw when we added the business record on the Business tab for test user, that created a relationship between the business and the client. And again, that's important. It allows us to pull that information into a query or report, see who has those relationships, and so forth. Tasks and reminders, we've just talked about this, but this is going to show you a list of any tasks or reminder or follow-up items created for that particular record or based on it. So here's that follow-up that I created initially just a little bit ago. So they'll all be listed here. Incidentally, if we jump back over to my Vista, you're going to see that follow-up listed here under tasks and reminders as well. Okay, so right away when I log in, I see that there was a follow-up here that I can then click on and reference. Okay, I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this. So you can go ahead and delete those reminders as well once the task is completed. The Notes tab is a standard tab on a record that allows you just to do what it says, enter notes for the name or the organization. So this can be used in a variety of ways, of course. For example, I've seen it used where people will post email correspondence with the person or the client. They'll post those emails here. Really, it's just a place for any additional things that you want to mention or keep track of regarding your interactions with the client that would not be noted elsewhere. Okay, anything useful, any useful information for that particular person can be entered as a note here. Last but not least, on this record, we come to the Roles tab. We talked about roles. They're critical in classifying your different records, determining what shows up on a record in terms of the different tabs of information that you see. And so it's going to show you, of course, what roles the person or the organization is in. You'll also see or should see a begin date for the role. So this record was added today, of course, so the role start date was defaulted to today. Roles may also have an end date. So you may also see that as well. And if there is an end date, then as of that end date, the role is going to become inactive. Okay? So over time, you may see on some of your records a list of different roles that they've been involved in, and you're going to see some with begin dates and some with end dates, and those roles, again, will be inactive. So that's a good way to see kind of a history of that person and your organization. You know, what they've done before and what they're active with now in terms of their role and the different programs that you have. Okay. A couple other things I'll note here while we're on this record. This is at the top of the screen above these tabs. This is called the name header, and this is going to display certain information about the name. Obviously the name, the email address, the different phone numbers that may have been entered on the record, okay, as well as an ID. This ID is what we call a system name ID. It's a random number that's assigned to every record that's added to Outcome Tracker. So this isn't something that you can edit. It's simply something automatically assigned to the person once they are added to the system. So I just wanted to quickly mention that. Over on the task box here on the right-hand side, there are a couple options to keep in mind. The Enroll in Activity link, we talked about the Activity Summary tab earlier and how I can use that to enroll them in an activity. You can also use this Enroll in Activity link to do the same thing. So again, if I wanted to enroll him in another coaching or leader's attendance activity or some other activity, I can click that Enroll in Activity button, select my activity, and then go ahead and enter my activity information here. Okay. The other option I have here is to pick name. And pick name just takes you back out to people and organizations and allows you to search for another record. So if you're done on a record and need to go back to another person or find somebody else, so I'm on test user, I can just click that pick name option to jump directly back to people and organizations. Okay. So I think, Maribel, you wanted to also sort of talk about activities in general and adding new activities. Is that right?
Yes. And then just as a reminder for everyone that's listening, Christopher was right. Depending on your role, there will be different tabs for your program. And that's something that we've been working on in these past few weeks. So whatever you saw right now for Empresas is not necessarily what you're going to see on your screen. So just as a reminder, and also if you see something on your tabs that you need edited or added to, please let me know so that we can get those going before we launch. And yes, Christopher, if we can go over how to add a seminar or cohort or session and enroll people into those sessions, that'd be great.
Okay, sure. Okay, so let's go into the Activities tab here at the top of the screen. So this is where you're going to find the different activities that are in your database. So we saw a lot of these when we went to the activity list tab on our individual record. This is also where, of course, I will go to add any new activities that I need to the database. So if there's a new event, a new workshop, a new coaching program where I need to record different information about that interaction with the client, then I will likely need to create a new activity for that because I need to be able, again, to track how many people enroll in it or do it, and then the different information that applies to them when they do the activity, okay? So under the task box here on the right-hand side, you'll see a link to define a new activity. And I'm going to make this a little bigger here so it's easier to see. Really, there are only a couple steps in terms of defining the new activity. You see in the drop-down list here, the default option is to just create a new activity from scratch, and oftentimes that might be what you'll want to do. You also have the option, however, in creating a new activity to copy from an existing template or from an existing activity. Okay, so if my new activity is very similar in terms of the questions I need to get information for, or the information I'm tracking, if it's very similar to an existing activity such as this coaching, then I might as well just copy from that activity, because my copy then will have questions from the activity I'm copying from, and that way the activity is pretty much done. I just need, maybe I'll need to edit the questions a bit to remove some I may not need, or I can add new questions to it, okay? So it's always a good idea to kind of look through this list when you're creating a new activity and see, is it similar to an existing one, and will I save myself some time if I copy from that one versus just creating it from scratch. Let's assume that there isn't one here that really applies to our new activity, though. So we're just going to stick with creating a brand new one from scratch and click the next button. Okay. The next step here is just to simply give the activity a name. So in keeping with my test theme here, actually let's call this a training example activity. So we'll want to enter a name. The other thing that you want to make sure you do here at this stage is to enter in an activity type. Okay, so you have several different activity types in your database. If this is another coaching activity, then obviously I would probably label this a coaching progress type. If it's has more to do with attendance, that type. If it's another seminar or session, then obviously that type. So the type here is important as well, because it tells Outcome Tracker what we can do with the activity in terms of how people can enroll in it. Okay, so let's just label this as another coaching. Okay. A couple other options that you'll see here. The most important one is whether the activity is repeatable or not. So what that means is, can the client or the participant enroll in the activity more than once? So a good example of a repeatable activity is your coaching. So they can probably come back for additional coaching sessions over time. So that's a repeatable activity. That's something they can do more than once. A survey, too, is typically repeatable, because over time we often want to collect multiple survey answers to see how their question or how their responses change over time. Okay, so you'll want to determine whether or not this particular activity is something that they can do or enroll in more than once. An example of something that may not be repeatable would be maybe a one-time workshop. Okay, so let's say I'm having an event tomorrow, and I want to add it into Outcome Tracker because I want to be able to add whoever shows up as participants in the database, because I want to be able to report on that. I want to be able to say, okay, these 20 people, they showed up to this event tomorrow, but it's only happening tomorrow. In other words, if one is one of the participants, he can't enroll in the activity again because it's just happening that one time. So oftentimes you'll have maybe classes or workshops or trainings or other types of events like that. There are more one-off activities where the person cannot enroll in it more than once. So that would not be marked as repeatable. Okay. We are going to mark this one as repeatable, as we're calling it a coaching type of activity. So the assumption would be that they can do that more than once. When you mark something as repeatable, notice that the other fields here are now grayed out and unavailable to me. And that's because those questions, begin date, begin time, are no longer relevant based on the fact that this is now a repeatable activity. Okay? The time of the activity is based on when they're enrolled or when they actually do it. And that's why we would not enter a default date and time for the activity here. Okay. We have a question. Can the address of the activity be added to the activity? Do you mean where the activity is taking place? You can certainly add that to the activity description. Here would probably be the best place so that you can see that in your list of activities on that main activities tab, so you'll see the address of the activity there. So yes, I would add it to the activity description here. Okay, so that's basically it. To just create the activity, it's just a matter of naming it, giving it a type or assigning it a type, and then deciding whether it's repeatable or not. So in this case it is, we're saying, so we're going to create that activity. Okay. Once you do that, you're taken to the activity screen itself. Okay. And we're looking now at the Edit tab. So the Edit tab contains a lot of detail about the activity, and this is where we can really fine-tune how we handle enrollments in the activity. Okay. For this particular activity, because it's repeatable, there's really not a lot we need to worry about here. Okay. The enrollments are pretty much going to be governed as far as when they do it. If this coaching, if my test user is enrolled in this training example activity tomorrow, his enrollment begin date is going to be tomorrow because that's when he does it. Okay. So for this, in this particular example, there's not a whole lot that I need to do here. Okay. So instead, what I really need to focus on is the questions tab. The questions tab is where I determine what information I'm actually collecting as part of this activity. When test user participates or enrolls in this activity, what information do I need to collect for his enrollment? There's another question. Would we want a field for location on the activity tab? Okay, so you're asking, should there be sort of a default field here to note where the location for this particular activity? The answer to that is you could have what we call a user-defined field here at the bottom. It could be activity location. It could have a drop-down of the different locations that you would need to reference. Okay. So that is if every enrollment in this activity is based off the same location. Okay. If you want to be able to say that this activity, that test user's activity was based on one location and somebody else's activity was based on another location, then that would be a question that we'd ask as part of every enrollment in the activity. Okay? So the bottom line is that if we want to have a location for every enrollment, we'd add the field here and enter the location here. Otherwise, we would add the location field on the questions tab here. Okay? So this, again, is where I'm adding the questions that I want to ask of everybody that's enrolled in this activity. When you come to the questions tab, you'll notice that there are several questions already added. And these are what we call standard enrollment questions. Every activity at least starts with when it happened, who did it, who the provider was, and how long the activity was for. You don't need to keep all of these questions. So maybe we'll take out end date and end time, but we'll keep provider and hours. So I'm going to delete those enrollment questions. Okay. So those are the standard enrollment questions I'm keeping. I do want to add others, however. So there are two ways to do that. If I want to add a question that already exists in the database, I'm going to find that under my list of available questions here at the bottom of the page. So let's say active duty military was something that we wanted to ask of participants in this activity. Then obviously that's a field already in your database here. So all I need to do is highlight it and then click the add button to add it to the activity. So that means that everybody enrolled in this activity, we're asking them if they're active duty military or not. Okay? Let me see if you have a location question here. Okay, and you do. So if we want to keep track of the location as well, then I can add that here. So another question, are there controls which prevent you from deleting questions fields if there is data? Yes. If there is data entered for a question as part of an activity, you will be warned of that. So deleting that question, of course, would mean that you would lose the data associated with that activity. And this is a permission, by the way, that is usually limited because of that to just a certain group of users. So that's another way to control that to prevent that potential for data loss. But yes, you are warned if you try to delete a question if it has data associated with it. Keep in mind that when you delete a question from the activity, so let's say I don't want locate or active duty military, I'm just going to delete it from the activity. I'm not deleting it from your database, okay? I'm just deleting it from that particular activity, so it's no longer part of that. So when people are enrolled in it, I'm not asking if they're active duty military anymore. The question is still in your database. Any data that was related to the question as part of other activities is still there, but all I'm doing is just taking it off of the activity itself. Okay? So we've got a location question there. Let's say that I want to ask a brand new question and it's not in my database anywhere. And so to do that, I need to click the new button. That's going to open up this new dialog box here, asking me to first define what my question actually is. Okay. So obviously this is just the name of the question, whatever you're asking. The question type. This is less critical. It's simply a way for you to categorize the different questions in your database. Okay. Functionally speaking, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't prevent you from doing anything with the question or adding it to certain activities. It literally is just allows you to kind of categorize all of your questions into one basket or another, if you will. There's a different area of the system you can go to look at all your questions, and you can look at and you can filter that list based on question type. So that's really where it applies. Anyway, so we would say maybe that this is miscellaneous or services delivered, something like that. Okay, but the question type really isn't all that important. The answer type is, however, This determines how that question can actually be answered. Okay, and there are a variety of answer types that you can have for the different questions in your database. The first there is a text answer type, and as it says, this just allows you to enter in any text for the question in order to answer it. Okay, so let's go back quickly to our test user record, and I'll show you specifically what the different question types look like. Let's go to general intake. Okay, occupation. This is an example of a text question. I can enter in any text I want here, okay? So a text type of question is pretty open-ended in terms of what somebody can answer there, right? Okay, so for occupation, I'm not limited to anything. I can enter in whatever occupation I want. And that's, again, the text type. Date fields, exactly what it says. This is where I'm entering a date. And date fields have a little calendar icon by them. Those can be clicked, and you can choose the date from the calendar, okay? So you can use the arrow buttons to go back or forward in time, or you can use the drop-down list to go back further, month and year, okay? So date fields are exactly like this. They allow you to enter a date and only a date, and they have that calendar icon attached. A drop-down list is exactly what it says. It's a list of drop-down values that I can select one from, okay? When you select a drop-down list as the answer type, we have a new option here, and this allows me to use an existing drop-down list or create a new one, okay? So a drop-down list is this. You have a country of birth question. I click the arrow there, and I'm taken to this drop-down list of countries, okay? Education level, another drop-down list question. So I'm able to select one value there. Most of your questions in the database will likely be drop-down list questions because they allow you, again, to be able to look at or choose one specific value. A text type of question, you can really literally enter anything in that text box, okay? So a drop-down list is a more limited set of values where you can select one option from. Multi-select is another type of drop-down list, except in this case, I can select more than one value. And again, when you select that option, you have the ability to reuse an existing drop-down list or create a new as for this particular question. An example of a multi-select, preferred contact method. Notice that I can click on email and text. Okay, I can't do that with the drop-down, but it's multi-select, allowing me to select multiple values. And you've got several other examples here, preferred language, another one, where I can select multiple values there. Okay? So that's a multi-select drop-down list. The name type allows you to have a name drop-down question, but based on role. Okay, so if I select that, just as I mentioned, the role option shows up. So this will allow me to say, okay, give me a drop-down list of everybody in the participant adult education role for this question. Okay, this option, frankly, isn't used all that much, but that's what the answer type does. It allows you to bring up a list of people from your database in one or more different roles that you can use then to answer that particular question with. Number, of course, fairly straightforward. Any questions where you're just entering a number or where you want to limit the responses to a number or an integer, you should have that as a number answer type. Okay, so that would be something like number in household, for example, is usually a number type of question because you're just entering a whole number as a response and not text or anything else. Okay. Currency, same thing, except these are obviously money values. So anything where we're entering different currency amounts would be labeled as a currency type. Phone numbers, we have a question about what type those would be. So we have the standard phone number fields in the database. If you were to enter a customized one, you would probably want that as a number field or text. Probably text, because most people will want to put in parentheses around the area code or dashes between the different sets of numbers, and you can't do that with a number type. It has to be text. Remember, a text question is sort of a free-for-all. I can enter characters, numbers, whatever I want in that to answer that question. So for a custom phone number field, you'll probably want to have that as a text answer type, so that way you can accept just the numbers or numbers with parentheses or dashes between the different sets of numbers. Okay. And then the last two here, these probably aren't used as much as well. If we're talking about a question that requires some sort of decimal or fractional number, then we can select that type here. And then there's time as well, where the response is obviously in a time format. Most of your questions, again, are probably going to be text or one of your drop-down options, number and currency. Okay, but once you determine an answer type, and I'm just going to call this a text question, you would then add it to the database. So notice that I click the Add Additional Question button there. That takes me to the next screen where I can go ahead and add an additional question if I wanted to. So if you have a set of new questions that you're adding to the activity, just go ahead and select that button there to continue adding questions until you're done. Otherwise, you're going to be taken back out to the activity screen each time, and you'll have to go through the process again. I don't actually have a question to add here, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. But back on the activity and the questions tab, there we see my test question, the type of answer that can be provided, and so on. Okay. So to add a new activity to the system, it's a matter of coming to the Activities tab, defining the new activity, really determining whether this can be a copy of an existing activity or not. If not, just create a new activity, click Next, title the activity, determine its type, and then whether or not it's repeatable. And then from there, you would create the activity and then likely go to the Questions tab then, as we were just on, to go ahead and add the specific questions for the information that you want to keep track of for enrollment in that particular activity. In our case, we want to know when it happened, who was the provider, how many hours the activity or enrollment was for, and then where it was, and then our test question there. Okay. Are there any questions about activities in general in terms of creating new ones or adding questions to them? Okay. So, Maribel, was there anything else that should be included here as far as the basic overview?
Just a little bit about the activities piece. For us, team, it would be important to keep consistency. So some of the activity types like profiles and whatever other, let's see what other, coaching, attendance, some of those things are things that we're pre-developing to have ready for you. So really, I would ask that you're only adding courses, seminars, and sessions on your own. And again, advanced users will be able to do those. And then any other type of intake form that you need added or something new that you need to intake for your programs, please let me know about those so that I help you get them ready.
Should we maybe, sorry, I was going to say, should we maybe run anything before to have it run by another person so there's nothing really that's posted before it's run, just so there's a second set of eyes on them?
I think that once we get all trained and really comfortable, I think you could just do it on your own. But in the very few times, it'd be great if you want my help with it, so I can just kind of help orient you so that we're just consistent. But after 6 months, I think the teams would be able to do them on their own. And then as far as just basic overall, I think, again, as a reminder, some of these tabs that we saw today may not apply to your program. But if you have any questions on how to enter data, how to delete data, anything like that, we can review this webinar again because we're going to get the recorded copy of it. Okay. Or you can come and talk to me, and then we'll practice with it and get it ready.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly mention, as you said that, so here's somebody in a completely different role than what we focused on today. The tabs are a little different. So there's no business tab here, for example. So depending on role, you will see different things here on the record.
Oh, and then another point for the team, this general intake form is one that we want, the questions here are something we want to ask across all participants. So this is just a reminder that we're going to be updating our paper intake forms for when our participants complete them. And that's something that we're going to talk about during the retreat next month. So just keep an eye and an open mind about that, because we will be updating all of the intake documents for the entire organization. And then you'll see some of these questions that we weren't asking before for some programs, we will be asking for them now moving forward.
Just to chime in on that, it's a really good idea to get as many questions as possible on intake, because even if it may not be relevant now, that person may be in another role at another point. So it'd be nice if we had all that up front. So that's why.
Yeah, and this is a work in progress, team, so we can always add, remove, edit, move. So don't feel like it's set in stone. Come talk to your supervisors first, your managers, because they're the ones that are also providing the data to Sue and I. But then you can also just come to me to give me some ideas and things that would work better for your program, specifically in these fields questions. Okay.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for this. Yeah.
Thank you, Christopher. And tomorrow we have another session about reports. And so if you're interested in learning how to download those, make sure you're on for tomorrow.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you all. Maribel, I'll get this recording to you as soon as it's published. In the meantime, I'll send you links to the 2 from last week.
Great. Thank you, Christopher. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.